Great. Now, you know how I am. Maybe you don't know who I am, but some of you know how I am. And I do these trainings and I have this curriculum and I then meditate in the morning and I get inspired and then I go way off the page, but it's not really off the page. And today's one of those days. So here we go. Is the glare from my window annoying? Do I need to shut the drape? Okay. Just because I like a little outside in sometimes, and I'm glad because it's just nice. Yesterday I felt kind of cooped up in my own little, in my white room. Da, da, da. Okay. Thank you for sharing. All right, now what am I doing? All right, good. So as I was thinking and reflecting about the richness of our session yesterday, I had some ideas. And one of them, because I always try to go bigger, and one of the ideas that came up yesterday was nervous systems, and Lindsay had brought up specifically about black nervous system versus white nervous system. And so I started reflecting on that, not intentionally, but it just started to come up for me, bubble up, about how we saw COVID as we could see that as a opportunity to maybe stay with ourselves a little bit more instead of being so externally focused, an opportunity to literally shelter in place, which would be almost like going to your own personal ashram and doing some deeper practices. And some people had less to do. And so one of the complaints about, I don't have time to do all these practices. Well, it gave some people time to do things that in the past they perceived that they didn't have time to do. For some people, they got to stay home with families more, whether they liked it or not. Others had less to do. So people were saying, oh, I'm so bored. Well, that's a perfect time to do practice. In the uncertainty moments, in the places where we feel uncertain, that's a great time to pull out some of your practices that you love. I mean, don't do practices you don't love, because then you're not going to do them. So finding the ones that you love are important. So that's what one of the gifts of COVID gave us, an opportunity to change our momentum. And what we've said before is when we change the momentum, we can actually start to find new nooks and crannies in the way our mind and nervous systems work. That's one reason why we do a long hold practice, or we do it. If we're used to practicing really slowly, we'll practice quickly just to change our habitual momentum. It's like breaking a habit. It brings us more into present moment. And so for me, I thought, well, Black Lives Matter, clearly it's a very important movement, and I mean, super deep. But then on one hand, it is, yes, about specifically Black lives. On the other hand, it isn't, because it's always bigger. And I'm not diminishing. I'm not trying to like white privilege myself here into this, well, it's just, all lives matter. I'm not going there. I'm saying, what did this awareness, if we look at Black Lives Matter like a COVID thing, as an energy coming into this scenario, what did it offer everyone? Whether you believe Black Lives Matter or all lives matter or whatever you believe there, I'm not trying to tell you one is the right thing to believe, but what did this energy bring in for everyone? For me, it's a container for me to see, embrace, acknowledge, and admit the parts of ourselves that we deny. Now, we brought this up in other types of workshops. For example, we do the koshas and the manifestation workshop, where it's like we're getting into our vikalpas, which are those thought forms that we have that keep us from manifesting our heart's desire, our sankalpa. And I've taught the workshop From Shame to Shaman, dealing with shame and how that is one of our biggest cripplers of us really stepping into our fullness. And what Black Lives Matter for me has brought forth, if we can go there, which it's sort of a dip your toe in the waters type thing for many people, and maybe just running from the water. But if we dip our toes into the water and say, yeah, I am a racist, and just say I am, and how could I not be raised in the culture that I was raised? And let's take it further. I am a sexist. I am a socioeconomicist. I am an whatever ist. Acknowledge that I am all these things that I judge so deeply. It's in me. By saying I'm not a racist is me denying these forces that are maybe some known as I get to more awareness, but also unknown, driving the bus of me that I'm not even aware of. If I'm not willing to say, yeah, that's me, and own that I, no matter how small or big, it doesn't matter, no greater than or less than, no matter what little part I have in there, and my unique part of that, it's in there. If I can't just own it, like I'm an alcoholic, or I'm a such and such, or I'm whatever things that we're ashamed to put forth, or say I'm a murderer. Yeah, have I murdered a person? No, but I mean, I murder bacteria all day long in my body. And even if by drinking this tea, I've murdered something because a living plant had to get cut down. If we start to admit that we're all of it, and we start to deny nothing, no possibility of whether I'm a murderer of tea plants or animals or people, or I'm a racist or a sexist or whatever ist, when I start to admit that I'm all of it, without shame, but curiosity, saying, wow, there's parts of me I didn't even know. I didn't even know I was a such and such until something shined a light. I was given an opportunity to look deeper into the bowels, literally. We're talking about root chakra, and we're talking about digestive tract yesterday, into the bowels of my being to see what's in there. If I admit, if we can create a culture of admitting that we're all of it and not make any faction wrong, like making racism wrong or murdering wrong or all these things wrong, the more stigma, we as the great judges of all things good, being yogis, what? Who gave us that right? Nobody. Oh, maybe ourselves. But if we can stop putting these big things about what is right and what is wrong and put them so separate, like I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. Well, what if you are? And I would say you are, because we're all of it. But if we can start to break this paradigm of this shame culture, break this paradigm that it's bad if I have a thought, because guess what? I'm sure we have them. Some way, judging it good or bad, we're having a thought, one that we're denying. So if we can break this paradigm and say, okay, yeah, I am that. So let me look at that. What does that mean? Let me get more aware of my blup, blup, blup tendencies. It's just another tendency. Yeah, some of them are very heated right now, so they're a little on the forefront. But then changing that paradigm, and I've said that 3 times deliberately, then we're breaking the paradigm where nothing is shameful. And it's safer for us to go and explore those tendencies without fear of being judged, without fear of being shamed, without fear of being kicked out of the consciousness club or whatever club you want to belong to. So can we stop denying all the tendencies that we are made of? Because if there is a tendency out there, it comes from fullness, it comes from wholeness, it comes from everything. And if we are micro, macro, and holograms of everything, then we are the full universe and beyond in our being. So we have every single tendency in there, whether those tendencies are awake and like dry matches ready to be hit and get activated to activate those karmas, or maybe the seeds have been burned, but we still have the seed. We still have part of it in us. Otherwise, we couldn't recognize it outside of ourselves either. So that's my heavy talk of the day. Maybe there's going to be more than one. But how can we feel more safe in talking about the parts of ourselves that maybe aren't so pretty, especially in a world that's judging the crap out of so many things? So as we talk about, let's go home and clean up our own house. That's one way to do it, is to start cleaning up my judgment of myself and not being afraid to admit that, like, for example, we talked about Black Lives Matter, like, I'm a racist. Now, does that mean I'm going and hurting people deliberately? No. Not for me, it isn't. And just because I grew up in a white community with white parents, with not a lot of conversation around it, or even experience around it. And then, of course, I haven't been in this lifetime in Black skin. So I don't even know what my life would be like. It would be different for sure, and way less privileged for sure. If we're talking just about racism, but we can apply it to anything now. I think that's one of the big gifts, if we choose to bite it, because it is a mouthful of what Black Lives Matter has brought to our awakening. If we just get off, I'm not saying, this is just so hard to talk about, because on one hand, it reeks of privilege. On the other hand, I'm getting bigger. On one hand, it is about racism. On the other hand, it's bigger than racism. But if we can get that tendency to be less ashamed about what our tendencies are, and dissolve that a bit, loosen that attachment, then maybe we start to change the culture, at least in ourselves, to be more present, to be more willing, to not be so embarrassed, so we can have bigger conversations that really welcome all points of view. Because, I'm sure that everyone in this room has been in a situation where you really want to talk about something that's important to you. But because of the power struggle in the room, you don't feel comfortable about saying what you really think. So we've all experienced what that feels like. And it feels pretty crappy. And what's keeping us from saying what we want to say is because we're afraid we're going to get judged or shamed, or worse, fired, kicked out of the club, maybe physically hurt. Who knows?
Jean, do you feel like awareness is the first step to reaching neutrality? This is Paige.
Hi, Paige. I don't know about the first step. I think it's a big step. I think willingness to willingness to not deny, willingness to just, let's just leap. Let's just say I'm a racist. Then what would happen? Well, first of all, every cell in my body just wants to shrivel up and hide under a rock, because to me, I was raised that is really a bad thing to be. I mean, that's like calling myself a murderer or something. That's like horrible, like really bad. But that's what keeps these tendencies alive, is because we just want to say no.
Well, I think racism, when I think of that word, it's charged like the word rape. Like there's just this visceral reaction that emerges because it's charged. But I think what you shared kind of made me think about how I was raised. Like in the 12 years that I was in public school, we probably only had like 5 Black people that whole time. And so just not being around African Americans, it's not that I think I always rejected that I was racist because I don't feel that I have a negative feeling toward them, but just because I wasn't around that culture, of course I'm going to have like subconscious beliefs or, you know, that sort of thing. So it's just interesting to think of it that way.
Yeah, and I think one of the key words, Paige, that you said is the subconscious or unconscious beliefs, the things, and this is where we get into the tendencies, which makes this a bigger teaching and an opportunity for all of us to get even more conscious and clear with our beings, is to be willing to unearth and to look at and do our own personal research on it. You know, not everybody may be curious to go down this path, but there are some that are. And when it's time and right for whoever to, you know, everyone's got their own personal path, but this energy is there for us to, what's my fear in saying that I'm a racist? Because, like I told you mine, it's horrible. And, you know, I can say words like colorblind all day long, but until I understand that that's only my white privilege talking, I didn't even know that that was a bad thing like 10 years ago to think like that, honestly, because of the way I was raised and what I was exposed to. But going further, learning more, being willing to be embarrassed, being willing to be kicked out of the consciousness club, being willing to say, yeah, that's in me. And I don't know to the extent that it's in me, but it's got to be deep. It's so deep, I didn't even know it was there. Which is also similar to our divinity. It's so deep in there, but it's easier to admit I'm divine, maybe, because it's full of light and love and no murdering and no, you know, greater than or less than, if we're going there, until it becomes that way. We take it, it's like anybody that has an addiction has to admit that they have an addiction first and own it and be not afraid to say that's my addiction. You know, where have we bottomed out in ourselves as far as some of our self-awarenesses go? Just, I'm not saying I have an answer, but I believe we do have a big opportunity here. And the more we can get comfortable with breaking the shame around our tendencies, racist or otherwise, then we open up conversations with each other. And in that, I'm opening up a conversation with myself to unwind the fabric of who Jean is and how I was raised and those things that, you know, there's things from my childhood I don't want to revisit or admit to, because they were shameful and horrible and embarrassing. But in order for me to, if I'm ashamed of it and I'm embarrassed of it, that is driving the bus of me, because I will die before I before that will grow to my grave. And that was modeled to me by my grandmother. Man, there were some family secrets, man. They went to the grave. She was not going to. So there's things about my family that were pretty maybe so bad, whatever that would even be, that there was a woman unwilling to disclose and literally died with those, you know? So that thing that we're willing to die before we admit to anybody or even ourselves, that's our God. That's what's driving the bus of us. That's what our altar is. That's the thing that we say to everything else, that is true. And that's the thing I want to hide. And then we spend our life hiding it. And that's where our prana goes. That's where our energy goes. So no matter what that trigger is for each person, we have one. Unless you don't. And then yay, then free and clear. And this conversation is just sort of like, oh yeah, I'm glad they're finally getting it, you know? And then you're having a good time sitting on your chair, drinking your tea. Say, yay, I remember that. That was awesome. The moment I had that realization that I didn't need to be afraid of being or shamed by the way I was brought up. Because that's just what, it's just, you know, it's like saying, oh, you know, you're 5 feet tall, so you are less than, but I didn't have any control over my height. And yet the kids at school really tried to make me feel bad about that. Something I couldn't control. I couldn't control how I was raised or the culture I was raised in. None of us could. But now what I can do is, what do I do with that information now that I am starting to manage my own prana, manage my energy here. Now that I can do something about. So the question goes back to digestion. What do I have capacity to do? What am I willing to do? How big of a bite do I want to take out of this? How big of a bite do I want to take out of that? The buffet is infinite. But one of the things that I wanted to bring the Black Lives Matter awareness and movement, and the movement around the movement that is not a brand new movement, is that it's just saying there's so much more to look at in there. And the things that we decide we're afraid to look at, or they don't apply to us, if we flip them away, and maybe that's true that day for something, maybe something else, it's just I don't want to deal with it, flip away. Well, at some point, may need to come back and look at that, because it might be the very thing that's in the way of what you really, really want.
Jean, this is Tori.
Hi, Tori.
Hi. I feel like something that really resounds within me throughout all of this is thinking about like how I was raised and the power that I hold within myself, how it's so easy just to give it away. Like just to give it away and just to be like, oh, like I have this power, but like it's like easier when you like just transfer it and be like, but that person's more powerful so they can deal with it. Like that person holds this power, but like, yeah, like I hold power and privilege, but that person holds a lot more power and privilege so they can deal with it. I don't know if that, I think that's just something about thinking, because I'm not like a real competitive person. And I think that has like a big piece to do with it, is like holding power. And when you really acknowledge your power, it can be really scary, because then things are like limitless, and then there's a lot of unknown, I think. So I think that's a really huge piece.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Tori.
Hi,
Anytime there's a paradigm shift, it's could be a little scary. Who's talking?
Oh, that was me, Jean, Mia. Can you see me?
Who?
Mia.
Mia, hi Mia. Yes, okay, I see you.
I have to say, I do kind of enjoy you looking around saying, who's speaking? Who's talking?
I know. It's just me with so many great faces. I want that face today. So.
When you were talking, there was a video about the end of the universe, and it goes, fast forwards to trillions and trillions and trillions of hundreds of trillions of years. but at one point it says the universe is made up of, there's nine, it's something huge, like 90% or 95% of the universe is driven by dark energy, and scientists have no idea what that is, where it comes from, how it works, anything. And so when you're talking, that's what I thought of, how everything in the universe is inside of us, and how probably like 90% of what we're doing is dark energy that we have no idea about what's actually making us do the things that we do. And I guess part of that, as you were talking, is about our ancestors, is how much of their stuff gets passed down to us. And so we're having to digest. I know for me, definitely with my family, I'm having to digest things that my mom and grandmother and her mother like just didn't have the tools to digest. I don't even know what I'm digesting, but I know that it's there. And so, you know, there's that stuff that's lingering. And and given our, I mean, just in America, our history of slavery and treatment of other, that's coming into play a lot too, you know. And I feel like I have tools, and I feel like the vast majority of people don't have tools for digestion and doing this kind of stuff, which is a really big thing, you know. So I have compassion for them, and it's you know, and someone needs to start digesting all of this stuff.
And that would be us. I mean, the more we can digest it, because there's more to digest. And I'm not, you know, and then everyone is going to do what they need to do in their own way. Whatever the person's call to action is going to be, do that. There's no one, not everybody needs to do the same thing, you know. There's a flow. Listen to yourselves. What do you want to do? What's important for you? I can't tell you what's important for you. I can't tell you what the next move is for you. I can only tell you, like, if you're feeling like you need to do this, so you, for what, it doesn't matter your reason, whether you're guilt driven or shame driven or just curiosity driven or just some letter in the mail came and you got an insight driven, you know, there's not one speck of judgment or suggestion here for me to you, because I'm not you, not digesting it the way you digest it. You know, vegan is great for some people and not for everybody, right? So digest your meal, the meal of all this information through your system, and then get nourished by the topic. Don't walk away. Get nourished by the topic. And if it's triggering, it is triggering. It can be super triggering, and you can trigger a bunch of people by having it. And some days you feel like triggering people and some days you don't. And at some days you think, when am I going to start being okay with triggering people? Because, I mean, now I'm just going to go off the topic of whatever the topic is, but I don't know about y'all, but just talking about your divinity and living from a place of more authenticity can be triggering to your people. You walk in one day and you say, okay, you know, at work, that's not okay with me anymore. I don't really want you to come down and blah, 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 and do this, or blah, 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 talk to me this way. We're talking about the same types of things. And at some point, if we're sitting and judging silently from afar, thinking those idiots, or why are those people so stupid? Well, then it's time for me to say something, because look at all the energy that I am spending judging them. Doesn't mean, just because I'm not saying anything doesn't mean I'm not judging them, you know? So to get off of our pedestals about it, and our silence doesn't mean we're judging, that we're okay with everything. Our silence doesn't mean we have our shit together. Our silence means we're just being silent. And I'm not saying this, you want to talk all the time, because there might be times that, no, I don't really want to. And there might be times where you go, I don't really want to, but I feel like I need to. I find it easier to talk, oddly enough, about sexual abuse, because it's not a race thing, issue specifically in groups of this. Because when we talk about sexual abuse, you know, when are you going to say no? You get a lot more, I'm feeling a lot more buy-in vibe now from the room. Yeah, let's say no. Because we've processed it, we've digested it, we've had years on the project of working it out and figuring out, when I say no, what does that mean? When I say no, where am I coming from? When I say no, why am I saying no? This is the time thing, everyone, that we talked about yesterday. Things take time. Don't think you're going to have an answer or the correct response when we're just in kindergarten about some of these topics. There's nothing wrong with I know you got your hands up, Lindsay. There's nothing wrong with, you didn't have your hand up? You did have your hand up. Okay. There's nothing wrong with taking our time if we feel like we need to take some time to figure out where am I coming from really? And I'm just not being flipped in the wind by someone else's big idea of what should happen next and how this should look and how this should go down. Now, I'm not saying there might be a great idea and we go, yeah, that sounds great. I want to do that. You know, there's a new restaurant. They have a fantastic appetizer called Purple Pen. I want to have that Purple Pen appetizer. I mean, I'm with that wave of consciousness. It's taking me to the restaurant to get the Purple Pen appetizer. But then I get to decide whether I like the Purple Pen appetizer. I can try it, and is it working for me? Lindsay, go ahead. What you got? If anything, I mean, you're not.
Yeah, I think I'm struggling with like the permission and like permission in this context to be silent, or permission in this context to take our time, or to like be in kindergarten, or to like, you know, basically be sovereign about how we relate to racism, which is, sovereignty is important. We're talking about sovereignty. I mean, racism is the lack thereof, right? So it's
I don't know. What's sovereignty mean? I mean, you got to fill me in on the definitions of these words because they get thrown around and I don't know what's hip and happen, and I'm not in that world. So
I think of like, I'm just talking about like sovereignty, like the like self-authority. And
when people say agency, are we talking about the same thing?
I would use it kind of interchangeably, but I don't know if other people would think that's correct. But I'm thinking like, you're giving permission. What I'm hearing is like the permission to relate to these issues in the way that we need to on an individual basis. And I also hear you promoting like accepting that, like, without shame, that we've either been like complicit in racism, or that like we are racist, or just you're promoting what is it, lack of shame. You're promoting lack of denial. You're like promoting an acceptance, is what I heard, at least at the beginning of the talk, of just like stop denying tendencies. So it's like that I agree with, and I always feel permission from you. I mean, we talked about that yesterday, like someone said in the practice, or that's how you approach the practice and of the asana yesterday. So yes. And then also it's just like, I'm hearing this conversation sometimes from the like perspective of either white people who have been in the anti-racist world for a while, or black folks and people of color who have been suffering from racism for, you know, eons. And I'm hearing it from those perspectives, and it's hard for me to like feel okay with the permission to take time, because it's like that kind of time is time we don't have if we're talking about the great we, like the we as like an entire people's, you know. It's like, because they're waiting, like I've heard that it is like much more destructive, these perspectives of neutrality, or these perspectives of silence, or these like waiting, or like scared to say the wrong thing, or just like these stepping back folks are more destructive sometimes than the radical folks who are like causing violence, like we saw 2 weeks ago. And So I'm feeling myself come up against like how neutrality can be so dangerous, and like self-acceptance can be so dangerous, because it's like, yes, I'm racist, like it's true, like those are instilled in me, those horrible like ideas, or those whatever, however we want to call them. I don't want to be too judgy, because I know that that's going to like bring up a lot of red flags, but like, do you know? So it's like, that's not the stopping point, it's seeming. And I also was coming up against like how in the spiritual world, which is like definitely white dominated right now, it's like the spiritual bypassing can happen too, where it's like, well, let's look at this from a higher angle and look at the bigger picture. And it's like, that is super healing sometimes. And also, we're human beings on planet Earth, like in a country whose system is just like needing so much attention. And it feels like those of us who are not like suffering as much from the violence and brutality, like have more energy, more tools of digestion, more space, less fear to be able to like help out more actively. So it's like, those are a couple of things, but yeah, it's a struggle. I'm like grateful all this is coming up, but like it feels incredibly triggering on every level, because it's like what's happening is not okay. And if we look up from here, it's like everything's okay because this is a divine experiment. And it's like, but also none of this is okay. And like we're emerging of the divine and human, like we're emerging. So how are we like gonna approach what's clearly unjust, you know? So it's just like hard to articulate, but you know, thanks for listening.
You're welcome. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, if we're looking for some easy answer like a sentence, not going to happen.
Yeah.
There's no one sentence, and just and unjust, those are simply a point of view. And with one of the things about the chakras training, we're learning that we can look through anything through any lens. Doesn't take away from any of the lenses that we look through. We have the option, we can look through different lenses to see the exact same scenario from different points of view. And if we remember that part of becoming facile in this understanding of self is that I can look through a lens, and then if I get attached to one lens being better than another lens, that's my work. And that's my work to get more. And neutral doesn't mean complicit. Neutral doesn't mean checking out. Neutral means you see everything. You're in present moment. And if you're judging the crap out of something, you are not neutral. A person is not neutral. So neutrality isn't this place of like doing nothing. It's a very active place of present moment. It's a very active place of not judging. So when I use the word neutrality, that's where I'm coming from. That may not be the other definition of neutrality out there in these other types of conversations. But when I say getting neutral, it doesn't mean falling asleep. It's way more fiery in the Sushumna Nadi of neutrality than it is to be, oh, I'm here over in the solar half and I'm here over in the lunar half. Because now I know what all my people say here in solar land, in my Ida, and in my Pingala. I'm just hanging out in Pingala land and doing solar practices, and I know what solar is, and so I know my solar team, and I whip over here to Ida, my lunar practices, and I know what my team lunar is all about. But when I get to Sushumna, how can I say yes to both at the same time and say no to neither at the same time? Hang on a second, Mia. And the spiritual bypassing thing, it's only spiritual bypassing if you're bypassing if you're bypassing yourself and what part you're playing in it all. So just because you're looking from a different rung for that moment to give yourself another point of view doesn't mean you're spiritual bypassing. I think spiritual bypassing, to me, by definition, my definition of it is if you've just decided to take yourself out of the equation altogether and have no personal, you're not doing anything. You're not letting the question land in you. You're not letting the question work its magic in you. You're not allowing the trigger to do its tapas in you. You're not allowing, oh my God, I'm so triggered right now, I can hardly stand it, do its thing. Spiritual bypassing would be say, no trigger. Instead of, oh, trigger, and now how can I see bigger? How can I see bigger with my trigger? I can see a bigger trigger. Lindsay, write that song. I want to see a bigger trigger. Boom. So spiritual bypassing, yeah, it can be an excuse. Well, I'm too divine for that. Well, that would be when you're too something for something, you're judging the crap out of something else. So you're not, yes, you're too divine for that and not divine enough for that either, because you're not divine enough to go down and get triggered. Fearlessly get my ass triggered today so I can see what else I'm sitting on that I didn't even know I was sitting on. I had a bee up my butt. I didn't even know that it was there until this trigger happened. Well, hello, thank you for sharing that information and that statement, because now I can oh, whoa, crazy, nah. And now, yikes. So that's not spiritual bypassing. And yes, the timeline question is an interesting one, but that's a big, big question. And I'm not making anybody's timeline right or wrong. And everybody has their own timeline, and I hold to that. What's the rush? It's taken all this long to get here. To think it's going to change in a day is unrealistic, and it probably won't change. We're just going to put a Band-Aid on it and make up some excuses so people can fit into the new change. But to actually have it do lasting change, everybody in this room knows when you've worked on yourselves, you don't go in and work on yourself and then miraculously overnight wake up transformed and everything changed. That topic, that thing that you were working on, it takes some time to wear it down. So, it's unfair to say, well, now I'm getting it, so where the fuck are you all? At some point, there was a moment where you started working on something. And I'm not talking to you, Lindsay, specifically. I'm talking at some point, we all started working on something. And then we got it and we said, come on, everybody, you got to get this right now. It took you how many years to get it? And then now someone's just hearing about it and we're expecting them to be where you are. I had this conversation with my husband. And this has probably taught me so much about having conversations. Because one of us will come into the room saying, blah, blah, blah. What do you think? And I'm going like, I'm just now hearing about this. Well, I've been thinking about this for a few months now, and I need a decision today. I don't have a decision today because this is the first I'm hearing of this topic or this decision that needs to be made clearly today. And if it was so important, why didn't you bring it up to me earlier so I could have the time that you had to digest it, to process it, to come up to your balanced and moment of decision? So why don't we give people time, because they might not have heard it at the same time. And don't we want change to come real change? Isn't it worth waiting for? Or are we fast food change? I'm just putting questions out. I don't have an answer here. These are just ways of thinking about it. Mia, go.
Lindsay, have you read My Grandmother's Hands? It's a book written by a healer. And after having read, all these other anti-racist books, it was very helpful to me because he speaks from a healer's perspective, and his timeline is very, very different. He speaks about how each of us need to heal our own bodies we all hold trauma in our bodies. And so, you know, and it's going to take generations. And hearing him, and he was, you know, he's approaching this as from a healer's perspective, which is the body comes first. We can't make these changes through politics and through socialization. You know, it's up to each of us to heal our bodies and then take that out. And that helped me a lot because, you know, it felt right for me, and it made more sense to me in how my view of the world and how I approach the world also. And then you know, and then from hearing and reading the political and social activists who have a very, very different timeline, and I would say probably aren't in their bodies in the same way or deal with healing in that same way. It was much more stressful. You know, it was very informative for me, and is informative to hear their perspectives. But I also know that when I took on that energy and was interacting with friends and family, it was not productive. I don't think any of us felt good after any of those conversations that I thought like, I had to have these conversations and you need to wake up now, you know? And luckily, like I think we had one of our trainings, Jean. So that was still there of like, you know, it's all fine, you know? And so I had that like, okay, like, you know, these people, they need, you know, some people I knew that they just needed time to digest and take it in slowly and see what's going on. Other people I knew it was just a hard stop and like, this is going nowhere. And like, at some point you have to realize that there are things you cannot change, right? And just like go on and just hope that at some point, you know, something in their life situation changes that makes them want to tackle that. But for a good amount of people, that might never happen. And so it's this question, and again, I really recommend My Grandmother's Hands, but where if, and I felt okay because of that, you know, of working on myself and doing what felt right for me and interacting with people in the ways that felt right for me, even if it wasn't what social activists and things had said I need to do, right? Because the people that are in my life, I have relationships with because I care about them and respect them in some way. And if I'm, you know, I want to give them that respect when I hear them say like that they can't handle that in whatever way that they do, you know? So I think it just depends. Like, again, it comes back to how we all have to digest everything that we're learning and then take it back out into the world and figure out how we want to share that with people around us. So, but My Grandmother's Hands, I think you will really like it. Have you read it, Jean? You seem to know what it is.
I know what it is. I have not read the full book. But I agree with the premise, and that's how I've approached healing my whole life before. Ever since I was a healer back in my early days. In my 20s, when I realized I wanted to get to the root of my stuff, that I didn't want to just put a Band-Aid on it, and that just going to the chiropractor to get my neck fixed every week wasn't the answer. I wanted to see what was causing me to go back to this place that I was. That's where I started to really look at tendencies, when I wanted to start unwinding myself from the root, going into the root causes, or what seed planted a thing in there. And I started through the body as well. The body gave me a foundation. We talked a little bit about Adhikari yesterday. For me, it gave me a foundation to then, when I started looking at my mind, it made more sense. Not sense in my brain, but I could feel they were in relationship, instead of me being completely dissociated from a body I hated and resentful that I was in the body that I was in. So then I would do everything to just escape the sensation of being in my body. getting into my body and then seeing how that led me into my thoughts, and then my thoughts then could share back with my body because now they're in relationship to each other. And when I read that little thing that Reshma did, it's like, I go, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I agree. So, yeah. That's my approach. You know, there'll be others that will say go into the mind and then do in the body, but we talked, I think, was it last time we met? Did we talk about the emotional body? Or was that Jumpstart January? When did I talk about the emotional body? Did I talk about the emotional body? Anyway, but the whole idea about the emotional body and how, no, it's its own body. We'll just go there another day. Because I think we're plenty in topic and off topic simultaneously. So yeah, I'm sure for many, it was a hard conversation as facilitator of the training to bring up, but I wanted to at least ask different questions and maybe put some questions out there that might bear fruit, or at least get on the table and at least start having a conversation that might be very triggering. Because, you know, those of you that have studied with me for any length of time, no, I haven't leaned away from the triggers. And I will continue to not lean away, but allow myself to be triggered as more information for me to get clearer and clearer. If I learned anything in my first 7 years of marriage, it was not a fun time, by the way. Oops, that's recorded. Honey, don't watch this. He knows. If I learned anything, the relationship is not in my control. The only thing I can control in that relationship is me. And my goal at the point where I was ready to leave my marriage for the 80 billionth time was, okay, I can leave when I'm not triggered anymore. Because if I leave while I'm still triggered, not believe I was not in a physically dangerous place. Okay, so there's reasons why you would leave when you're still triggered. Okay, so I was not in a physically abusive marriage, blah, 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 blah. So I was physically safe. Emotionally, that was my own hell. Okay. But I said to myself, self, you can leave when your husband stops triggering you. And then if you want to leave, you can leave. You got to clean up my house. I had to clean up my house before I would let myself walk away. Because otherwise I knew I would just take it somewhere else. And I already had a lot of skin in the game, time in on the game. And so why not see it through? Because it took me that long of being triggered and in literal, my own personal hell for years. It took me that long to wear myself down enough and be that uncomfortable enough for me to really go in and see myself and see my part of it. And be willing to do something about it, not expect something to be done for me. Because I read the fairy tales, and if you were good, you got to be the princess. And I was pissed off because I was good and I was never the princess. At some point, you're just tired of being the scullery maid. That was my role. Told God he cast me wrong. I knew I was a princess. That's when I thought God was a he. Now it's not a he for me. Back in my younger days, he was Catholic. He was definitely a man. Now it's an it. Don't take that wrong. It's not, God isn't a gender thing for me. Okay. Phoebe, thanks. Next workshop, getting bigger than our triggers. Yeah, I think that could be one we could do for sure. How are we doing? I'm thinking a little break might be great. Let's take about 5, stand up, walk around, cool off, be back. We're going to be practicing soon.